Good evening, everyone. My name is Evelyn Joki, a nutritionist working in Nyeri County. And today, my topic is about children's challenging eating behaviors. My introduction: the challenging eating behaviors in children mainly occur during early childhood. These behaviors include picky eating, food neophobia, and food selectivity, which are more connected to each other even though they differ with prevalence and scope. The severity and degree to which these behaviors are conveyed is influenced by both genetic of the child and the environment in which the child lives. Learning about food and eating in children mainly occurs during the transition, that is from exclusive breastfeeding diet of infancy to the omnivorous diet, that is complementary feeding at 6 months. This early learning is controlled by children's genetic predispositions, which include the unlearned preference for sweet tastes, salty tastes, and the rejection of sour and bitter tastes. However, each of these three behaviors impacts outcome of nutrition, health, and general growth outcome of the child. Although the risk of outcome is high, several researchers have reported that caloric requirement is met for an individual child, but food consumption is driven not only by the need to obtain sufficient calorie for survival, but also to experience reward. Reward-driven eating relies on human biology and the modern food environments. Its subcomponents such as liking, wanting, salience have been enmeshed in children's eating behaviors. The consequences for the child's diet with these behaviors include poor dietary variety and a possible distortion of nutrient intake, with low intake of iron and zinc associated with low intakes of meat, fruit, and vegetables being of particular concern. As you may notice, from around 6 months in complementary feeding, the main challenges is having adequate iron and zinc in the diet. We will start with the first challenge, children challenging eating behaviors, which we'll say is picky eating. So what is picky eating? Picky eating, also known as fussy, faddy, or choosy eating, can be defined as the consumption of an inadequate variety or quantity of food through the rejection of a substantial amount of both familiar and unfamiliar foods. It is classified as part of a spectrum of feeding difficulty in children with unwillingness to eat familiar foods or to try new foods, as well as strong food preferences. So, picky eating can be both uh, rejection of either familiar or unfamiliar foods. What are the causes of picky eating? Picky eating is caused mainly by early feeding difficulties, late introduction of lumpy foods at weaning, pressure to or at complementary feeding, pressure to eat, and early choosiness, especially if the mother is worried by this. Also, protective factors include the provision of fresh foods and eating the same meal as the child results to picky eating. So, example, when you start complementary feeding at 6 months, and then instead of giving maybe mashed foods, you keep giving blended foods. So, by the time you start introducing lumpy foods, the baby refuses to eat and thus becomes a picky eater. Influences of picky eating. Picky eating is greatly influenced by, you can subclassify them by child factors, example, age, personality, tactile defensiveness, cognitive factors. It can also be classified into food preferences, can also be influenced by environmental factors, can also be influenced by genetics. By genetics, we'll start by the first subtopics, the child factors. Influences of picky eating, child factors. Example, age. Age, pickiness is moderately stable from preschool to school age. Those who display pickiness at age 4 may have a possibility of starting this behavior 2 years ago. So from picky eating usually occurs from between 2 years and 4 years. Personality, increased level of frustration or rigidity as features of child's temperament are linked with increased possibility of developing picky eating behavior. Tactile defensiveness. A child will be more selective in his or her eating if he or she is sensitive to touch and dislikes the feel of various tactile stimuli in general. This child also becomes more dismissive of tactile stimulation or in his or her mouth. So if a child does not like to be touched, it also can also translate to him or her not wanting to have the same in his or her mouth, not wanting to have some textures in his or her mouth. Cognitive factors. Children's cognitive ability may have negative influence on the food perception, mental representation, categorization of food items, and emotions and feeling towards food, resulting to picky eating behaviors. Environmental factors that may influence picky eating behaviors include culture. Culture affects dietary diversity, the quality, the patterns, which alters normal feeding routines of the child, which in turn can lead to picky eating. Another environmental factor that can lead to picky eating is media. Children with normal developed brains are able to decode the information from the social media. Example, when some advertisements comes on TV over and over again, it may influence the child to favor a certain type of food and thus leading to picky eating. Parental influence. The children's caretaking practices, the way they are fed, and the reaction to their eating are just normal eating behaviors emerging to new behaviors such as picky eating. Also, if a parent favors a certain type of food, it may lead to influence to the child and thus making the child be a picky eater. Another influence of picky eating is genetics. The variation between different children in terms of genes and other innate characteristics derives to different tastes, sensitivity to certain compounds, which may result to picky eating behavior in a selected member of a particular genetic group. The genes linked to a child's sensory responses has been blamed to be the root cause of influencing picky eating habits in several children. So, what are the guidelines of managing picky eating? Here are some tips that I can give you on how you can manage picky eating in children. Uh, one of the one of the things that you can do is routinely follow the feeding program of the child as it is without changing. That is, offer meals and snacks at particular time every day at the same time for the child so that they can have a routine of feeding. Even if the child fails to take the certain food at that particular moment, just make sure that he or she knows that it is a feeding time. And you can give water in between meals. The second point, make the feeding environment pleasurable. Let it not be a war zone. You reduce the disturbances during feeding times, like you can reduce the volume of the TV, you minimize the distractions around the baby so that they can know it is feeding time and it is a pleasurable moment. Also, you can serve a variety of vegetables at different feeding times with favorite dips or sauces. Another tip you can use is provide positive motivation. Instead of all threatening the child all the time when he or she refuses eating, you can provide positive motivation. Example, clapping for the child when they feed and not beating the child. Another tip is be creative. Add different variety of food components like vegetables during preparation. This avoids development of picky eating due to change of texture, taste, and color, as vegetables are of different colors, so you can incorporate that in the food. Another tip you can use for picky eaters is limit offering dessert as a reward. The taste of dessert is better than other food. Example of a dessert is ice cream. So you can limit offering dessert as a reward, because if they know that they will eat ice cream, they will not want to eat the other food because ice cream obviously is sweeter. So you can limit offering dessert, or you can change the dessert to be a yogurt or a fruit. It doesn't have to be ice cream. Another tip is avoid being a short order cook. A short order cook, in other terms, is when the child, example, in the timetable today, you've prepared rice and beans and spinach, but the child says that they don't want to eat that. And then you start offering other types of meals at that particular time. That is not good because the child needs to know that it is time for eating and you will eat whatever that you have prepared. You have to give the child time and expose them to the particular food so that you can limit the possibility of picky eating and you can improve the eating habits of the child. Another tip you can use is recruitment. That involves you involve the child in various practices involving food. For example, you can allow the child when going shopping to pick the vegetables that you're going to cook so that he or she may feel involved in the process of cooking and may be more receptive when eating. Another tip you can use in picky eaters is change the type of food as the child ages. At different ages, introduce different types of food to ensure that the child is getting in touch with the food that the family takes. At around 9 months of age, in complementary feeding, the child is supposed to be eating finger foods mainly from the family pot. So instead of mashing the food, you can allow the child to be eating the finger foods from the family pot and thus enabling the child to have a choice. Another tip is getting ease on feeding. If your child isn't hungry, do not force the child to take the meals because this means that the child might even choke if you force the child to eat. So they are supposed to respect the child's appetite and the lack of appetite too. Respect both the child has appetite right now, and you can respect the fact that the child does not have appetite at that particular moment. So you can serve small portions of food, minimizing the possibility of overwhelming the child, and offers the child the opportunity of asking for more food. In conclusion, in picky eating in children, picky eating is largely a phenomenon of developed countries and involves a complex set of interactions between parents, caretakers, and children centered around food selection and consumption. Picky eaters are at increased risk of negative dietary intake, a potential mediator for adverse health and development outcomes. Cases of picky eating may differ by country, reflecting differences in food, culture, and feeding practices. So we will go to our second challenge in eating behaviors of children, which is food neophobia. What do we mean by food neophobia? Food neophobia is characterized by a reluctance to consume or an avoidance to try unknown foods or new foods. The behavior has a positive significance in minimizing risk of eating foods that are harmful to health, but its negative significance dominates the positive significance. The aversion causes food monotony, which can result in nutritional deficiency among children. In this case, food should not be solely viewed as a basic need, but also as a source of pleasure, socialization, cultural transmission, and a factor of great importance for health. So, food neophobia, in simple terms, is reluctance to try new or unknown foods, or the avoidance to try new or unknown foods. The neophobic behavior mainly occurs at a significant period for the formation of eating habits at age group of 2 to 5 years. Lack of adequate knowledge of this behavior is, if left unnoticed, it is usually left unnoticed by many parents. This reinforces the possibility that the prevalence of neophobia is even greater than the data reported in vast of literature, because most of the parents do not report this type of eating behavior. What are the main causes of food neophobia? The causes might be individual, biological, psychological, economical, anthropological, or social cultural factors. We'll do one by one. We'll start by individual factors. Individual influences such as children's innate preferences for sweet and savory flavors, influence of the sensory aspect of the food, and childhood anxiety as a result of their personality plays a very great role in development of food neophobia. We'll go to the second point, biological factors. Biological determinants of food neophobia can be subdivided into physiological, which provides the most basic determinants of nutritional behavior, pathophysiological, and genetic. Humans' digestive physiology provides little restriction to their food choices in essence of its quality and quantity. Therefore, food is selected from a wide range of organic stuff, be it of plant origin or animal origin. Physiological restrictions are escalated by a series of possible diseases like infections, like a simple flu can alter the taste or the odor of a food item. Food intolerances or allergies, Crohn's disease or diabetes. Influences of gene and pathophysiology lies on influence of gender, the sensory sensitivity to specific chemical substances like phenyldiocarbamide, and possibly specific taste preference. So physiological factors that influence food neophobia. Nutrition behaviors as other behaviors are defined by the SOR model. What is the SOR model? The SOR model means stimuli for S, or organism, and R, reaction. Physiological factors in mental processes view are divided into activating ones, emotions, motives, and attitudes, and cognitive ones, perception, thinking, and learning. That is the psychological factors that influence food neophobia. We'll go to the economic factors that influence food neophobia. Economic stability of a child's family defines the ability to access central market for purchasing variety of foods, which needs to be provided to the child to limit the risk of developing food neophobia. If a family is economically unstable, mainly the child will be provided with locally available foods, which creates a monotonous, leading to result into food neophobia. Anthropological factors. Freedom in food choices helps to prevent starvation of a specific type of food is scarce, but it increases the occurrence of nutritional imbalance and intoxications. Children with normal brains and good cognitive perception are fortunate since their food choice and food intake, other than digestion and metabolism, are cognitively controlled using an open and extendable information system. Let's go to the social cultural factors that influence food neophobia. Social and cultural environment shapes behavior, including nutrition behavior. Behavior is influenced by the norms of the different cultural groups, which either one accepts the norms to be accepted as a member of the group, or at least to be associated with the group, or one rejects the norms to be clearly dissociated from the group. Sociocultural also sustain factors such as identity, community, communication, and spirituality, which affects nutrition behavior either positively or negatively. Therefore, the child is forced by circumstances to adapt to these norms that lies in their family. So how can we curb food neophobia in children? Here are a few tips that you can do so that a child can come out of this challenge eating behavior called food neophobia. You can take every feeding as a slow process until the child adapts. Do not try and do this process quickly. Just take every feed as a slow process until the child finally adapts to the new food. The other tip you can use is eat the new food to motivate the child. You can be a good example for the child so that they can see you eating the food and feel comfortable, the new food, and feel comfortable for them to try to eat the new food. Make the feeding environment pleasurable. As I repeat, like in the last slide, do not make feeding time a war zone, because if they associate feeding With B-teens, it will not be pleasurable and they will not accept the new food. Do not force the baby to feed. Also, forcing the baby to feed may lead to choking. So just don't force the baby to feed. Try the new food in small quantities. You can try new food in small quantities, which is good, instead of giving a new food large quantities, because if it is in small quantities, the baby will automatically slowly get used to the new taste and thus eliminate the food neophobia. Um, you can also make the new food familiar. Be introducing it slowly in the household so that they can be seeing the food in the house, and so that they can see that it is not a new food but a familiar food. Also, another tip is wait for the right time to offer the food. Offer the new food when the child is hungry, has an appetite, and is in a good mood. That way, there is a higher chance for the child to accept the new food. So we go to the third challenging eating behavior in children, and that is food selectivity. So, food selectivity is usually determined by the temperature of the food, the texture of the food, the appearance of the food, the taste of the food, and the smell of the food. All that constitutes to food selectivity. So, what is food selectivity? Food selectivity is an eating it is an eating behavior which behaves like picky eating and is characterized by consumption of an abnormally limited variety of food. So all these challenges in eating behaviors, that is picky eating, food neophobia, and food selectivity, are somehow similar but different. There's a little difference in each of them, but they are all challenges in eating behaviors in children. So what exactly is food selectivity? Food selectivity is actually mostly reported in children with developmental disability than in typically developing children. It is usually common, particularly in children with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. It is a development disorder of variable severity that is characterized by difficulty in social interactions and communications, and by restricted or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. Technically, any child who eats fewer foods than normal and who avoids any foods could be called food selective. Management of food selectivity requires a multidisciplinary care service due to the possibility of underlying medical condition, like we said, mostly occurs in children with ASD. Nutrition management is the key consideration, but also other care managements are a concern in this particular eating behavior. So, what is the difference between food selectivity and picky eating? As I said earlier, picky eating a child may eat a limited number of foods, but they eat at least one or two foods from each of the food groups, which include cereal, grains and starches, protein foods, fruits and vegetables, and dairy products. So a picky eater will eat a limited number of foods from these food groups, whereas a selective eater has aversion to many or more foods, or has an unusual aversion for food. Example: selective eaters may avoid all types of cereals, all types of meats, all types of cold foods, all types of foods with red color, or all fruits and vegetables. So picky eaters have a more balanced diet than selective eaters. Selective eaters may refuse to eat any type of food, any type of food from any of the food groups, and maybe example can only eat rice only, will not eat any other type of food from any other sources, from any other food group. But a picky eater will eat small quantities of food from the different food groups. So that is the main difference between a picky eater and a selective eater. So what are the causes of food selectivity? Causes of food selectivity include chronic constipation, history of tendency towards digestive problems such as reflux, medications, altered or heightened sensory perception of food, difficult medical history that affects interest in or ability to eat, sensory integration problems, certain medical or genetic conditions, example autism, inadvertent history of parental reinforcement of food selectivity behavior. So we look at a couple of them. We look at a couple of causes of food selectivity in detail. We start with chronic constipation. Autism disorder mostly cause severe constipation, which results to gastrointestinal discomfort resulting to refusal to eat. The other point was history or tendency towards the digestive problems such as reflux. Gastrointestinal reflux disorder, GERD, alters the taste or odor of the food, leading to increased possibility of food refusal. Also, the burning sensation when one individual experiences reflux or heartburn leads to food selectivity. So one might start associating certain foods with reflux and thus be a very selective eater. Another point is medication. Food intake may be affected due to alteration of taste sensation, reduced acuity to taste, or undesirable aftertaste caused by drugs. So some drugs may cause altered taste, and thus you associate that with certain foods, and thus be very selective in eating certain foods. Autism, as we said earlier, autism is one of the if you have food selectivity, most of the children usually are in the spectrum of autism. Although no dietary differences are mostly observed in infants at 6 months, toddlers and preschool age children later diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder reports fewer consumption of vegetables, less fresh fruits, and less varied diets, that is food selectivity, than children without ASD. Children with ASD are more likely to experience feeding problems compared to typically developing children. Moreover, food selectivity is often reported as a common cause of their feeding problems. So I hope we have gotten the differences between the three challenging eating behaviors, that is picky eating, food neophobia, and selective eaters. I am welcome to any type of questions. I have finished my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Hello, Njoki.
Hello.
Uh, that was a good one. I believe every mother has their own story to tell about eating behaviors. Now I need some clarity. Do
Mhm.
we introduce complementary at 6 months or after 6 months? Because there's someone who told us it's at after 180 days. That means 6 complete months. And there are some guidelines that are saying at 6 months. Which is which?
What I usually like to tell the mothers to avoid confusion is just calculate 180 complete days, so the 181st day, just like that. The 181st day is that is the time we start introducing foods, complementary foods. Just calculate by the calendar the 181 day after 180 complete days
So,
to avoid the
uh,
question of 6 months or after 6 months. Just count 180 complete days.
and if you count it, it translates to how many months?
six,
Is it not
6 months.
you know,
At 6 months,
six, almost
when you give
7?
the baby vitamin A.
Yeah. Will that be at 6 months when you give the vitamin A? At
Yes,
when the baby finishes 5 months, I would say. Sindio?
technically, yes.
because if it's 180, that means it will be 6 plus some days because of the 31 days, those months that have 31 days. So it's a
Yes.
bit. um, Thank you.
Welcome. Any other contribution? Any questions or contributions? Milan, over to you. Priscilla Kagesha, any comments?
Uh, Thank you, Doki. That was a nice one. I'm not sure I have any comments. It was a nice presentation, well explained. Yeah, thank you.
Namesake, Evelyn, Nema.
Today's presentation was a very nice presentation, and I can relate to it because I have my sister who has that problem of being a picky eater from childhood. Now I can understand how it has really affected me. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Um, Thank you, Joki, for the presentation, and I thank our viewers for this opportunity to be able to join us today. Thank you.